What's up, my wizards? It's Dev and Ziggy down here from Mtg. We like a magic. And today I'm going to start today's video by reiterating a point that I've made in a previous video, and I'll probably restate it in videos in the future. But, thesis, I think that the state of MTG YouTube in this day and age is such that you have two sort of competing factions. But largely, you basically have two communities. One just wants to know how to ladder as fast as possible. Give me that juice, dog, man. I want to get to Mythic or Diamond this season. How do I do it? Give me the best decks in the format. Then, on the other hand, you've got the part of the community that just wants hilarious decks. You've got the people that want, 8-card, 10-card combos that kill your opponent in the most roundabout, funniest way possible. And that is the community I want to address today. Now, I see a lot of content creators, myself included, just as much as anyone else, who have been sort of forced into a virtual arms race to the bottom to bring you the craziest jank they can possibly bring you with the most obscure cards that you've probably never heard of that somehow form a Voltron and kill your opponent on turn 13. And we want to commit that to video and send it out into the world so that you can laugh at it. And honestly, it's a nice, honest living, and it does require an awful lot of intelligence and creativity. But even with so many content creators scraping the bottom of the barrel to find weird cards and weird ways to win with said cards, there are still way too many cards out there that I don't think are quite getting their due, especially in this day and age where we're all just trying to find the dumbest cards possible to win with. So that's why I brought you here to chill on the couch today. We're going to discuss a bunch of different cards that are still obscure even in a time where people are effectively paid to find the most obscure cards and build decks around them. There are plenty of things at the very, very bottom of this barrel that I still think are nonetheless worth analyzing. So today, we're going to bring you the top 10 build around cards that nobody's building around.
Yo, I'm sorting through some heinous haters like a pooper scooper. I'm just trying to take my life like a Koopa Trooper. I'm Double Mario, that mean I'm super. And I'm freaking dangerous like a Chupa Cabre. Got them all day like a Kanye, but I'm way better getting cheddar in Monterey. But Jack, you don't know, man. You got the show, man. You want roast beef? Well, I'm Arby's.
And we're back. Just a quick reminder, remember to like the video and do all the YouTube stuff, spread it around, blah, blah, blah. Recommended feeds, you know what to do. You're on YouTube. Support the content creators that you like by just hitting the thumbs up. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. Let's get on to the list here because we got actually a lot to discuss and a lot of little wrinkles to get into with all of these weird cards. So let's go ahead and start with our honorable mention here, Furious Rise. Now, I will admit to a little bit of bias here with the honorable mention, but that's why it's an honorable mention. I didn't put it on the list because I want to acknowledge my bias. But this, I have a special affinity for because it was my exclusive preview for Theros Beyond Death. But since then, been a little bit disappointed no one's played around with it, myself included in that. I'm just as guilty as anybody else, again, in not playing Furious Rise. But honestly, seems like there are tons of creatures, tons of decks that could play this card and reliably get an extra card every single turn off of it, because we've got a lot of decks playing things like Lovestruck Beast, Questing Beast, Rotting Regisar, Shifting Ceratops. There's just no end to the amount of 4-power creatures that come down relatively early in the game. Gruel Spellbreaker with a counter on it. And honestly, I could keep going naming creatures, but we'd be here all night. There are tons of playable 3- and 4-drop creatures that have 4 power, and people are already playing. So I'm just a little surprised not to see a 1 or 2 of Furious Rise here and there. This is kind of comparable to a card like Phyrexian Arena, except in this case, it gets around like Narset, which is something you actually have to worry about in this format. So I really don't know why more people, again, myself included in this, haven't really done much with Furious Rise, because a guaranteed card every turn is worth kind of a lot. But on to the actual list here, and we'll start, of course, with number 10. I don't know why I even said that. We'll start with number 10, Guardian Project. Really surprised I haven't seen more about this card. Ask yourself a question. Thought experiment here. Do this as you're playing games in the future, as long as you're playing a deck that plays creatures, which is a lot of them. But every time you play a creature from here on out, especially past turn 4, ask yourself the question, do I already have a copy of this creature and player in my graveyard? And I guarantee you that more times than not, the answer will be no. You would have drawn a card off of Guardian Project in that situation. Once I really noticed Guardian Project, I started putting myself through that thought experiment, and yeah, it turns out that I've missed plenty of opportunities to draw lots and lots of cards over the course of many games with Guardian Project. This does cost 4 mana, and it does take a bit to get going, but honestly, just like Furious Rise, I'm surprised that this doesn't see play as just a card advantage engine in decks that don't often have access to good card advantage engines. But even in decks that do, decks like Fire fires might actually like a card like this. You know, that first Cavalier Flame will almost always draw you a card. Same thing with the blue Cavalier that you play for the first time in a game. Almost always drawing you a card. Kenrith, drawing you a card. Any other creature that you might play in fires, the first time you play it, Guardian Project's going to draw you a card. And Guardian Project is effectively free to play on the same turn that you play your fires. So, again, a little bit surprised it doesn't pop up a little bit more often in those lists. But number 9 is one that I got a lot to say about, and that's Masterful Replication. Let me go ahead and get the first mode on this out of the way. It's actually not terrible when you think about it. You know, you get 6 power at instant speed that can help you just ambush the opponent when they attack in. Or maybe if you're in a control deck and you want to play entirely at instant speed, you take control of the board state, and then end of your opponent's turn, flash in 6 power. That'll end the game quickly. But I think there are just better control finishers than this card if you're going to use it for the first mode. It's the second mode that I'm most interested in. Now, especially if you're trying to find the dumbest, jankiest, most hilarious way to win a game, which again is we've established as part of the point of this video, finding those cards, then one thing you can do with this is just turn all your artifacts into witches' ovens. And then if you got a Cauldron Familiar out, whoops, you just, suddenly you're just able to, you know, hit for 10, 12 damage. You got that going for you. But there's also Retributive Wand. Turn all of your things into Retributive Wands, and then like Planar Cleansing or something. Like get them off the battlefield in some way or another. And then you're dealing 5 damage per. You could probably win a game that way too. Thanks to the aid of cards like Karn, who I will bring up many a time in this video, but I don't think it's quite obscure enough to actually be an entry on the list. People play with Karn on occasion, but especially to enable really janky stuff, people play with Karn. But, you know, Karn can go and get any artifact out of your sideboard, so you could set up a board state with tons of, like, again, low-grade artifacts, guild globes and whatnot, and then go fetch an artifact out of your sideboard and turn all of your artifacts into that artifact. So not only can you do that with some of the stuff I've already mentioned, like, you know, Retributive Wand and whatnot, but there's things like Gate Colossus, turn all of your artifacts into a Gate Colossus. That seems pretty hilarious as well. What if you turned all your artifacts into Brimstone Trebuchets and then played a couple of Knights? That seems also very funny. What if you turned all of your artifacts into Wishclaw Talismans? Especially if you had a Karn out, that would just, so funny. So you just tutor up like 8 cards out of your library. That, good. That seems very delicious. Also, turn all your artifacts into Steel Overseers. Come on. And then, even if you only have a couple of multicolored creatures out, it seems like it might be advantageous to turn all your artifacts into Glass of the Guild packs. There's just so many like ridiculous, stupid ways to possibly win off of Masterful Replication that I'm really surprised we haven't seen more people build around this card. Speaking of artifacts, my number 8 is just one of those such things. Can't English properly this video. But anyway, my number 8 is Bloodsoaked Altar. Why haven't we seen more of this card? It's so good. Like, just on paper, 6 mana is an awful lot, but I actually think this has, like, meta reasons to play the card, you know? First of all, this sort of beats a Dream Trawler. Given that you're able to keep creatures on your side of the table, one way or the other, this can beat a Dream Trawler because it creates tokens that block and kill Dream Trawlers. So just keep that in mind. That's pretty nice. But we've also got, you know, Nightmare Shepherd, so that when you sacrifice a creature to create a 5/5 demon, you just get that creature back, and then you repeat the end of the battlefield trigger on a Gary or something. And this seems a lot more impactful than just sacrificing a creature to a Witch's Oven and getting the Gary back, you know. This also creates a 5/5 demon that flies in and kills your opponent, just in case the Gary doesn't get it done. In that case, just I like it. You know, I like it with Mayhem Devil, just another way to sacrifice creatures. There's a lot of really cool things about this, and even though it costs 6 mana, we are routinely getting to turn 12 in this format right now. If you're not playing against mono red, you're getting pretty late into the game because a lot of decks in this format, especially on the top tiers, have these really kind of late game, just like home run plans, like Teamer Adventures, and even stuff like Control, obviously, looks to establish dominance of the game and then play Dream Trawler, but that usually doesn't happen until pretty late into the game. Decks like Ramp, sure, they ramp into an obscene amount of lands by turn 5, but they still don't usually finish until turn like 9 or 10 some of the time, so you know, decks that play Agent of Treachery have to get to 7 mana to actually play Agent of Treachery. There's some late game shenanigans going on in this format right now. So Bloodsoaked Altar is a card that's easy to get to in this format, especially if you do ramp into it, you know. Play Paradise Druid to get to it faster, sacrifice Paradise Druid to it. Just making a 5/5 flyer on every turn seems very good to me. So I think it's definitely worth the 6 mana. And I don't know. I don't know why no one's playing Bloodsoaked Altar. At least try it. Now, number 7 is a card that really baffles me because it's got uses in multiple high-tier decks right now, and that's Flood of Tears. I just never see this card anymore, and it's such a cool little build-around because it allows you to not only bounce everything and reset the board state, but also get a free play out of it. I will bring up Fires again for this entry because this does a few things for Fires decks. Not only does it reset the board state, but it gives you a free play. This allows you to do a couple things. Get your Fires back down right then and there. Or, if you already had a Fires out and you play this for free, well, this resets your spell count. You don't have a Fires out anymore. You play as many spells as you want, so use your mana however you want to, play whatever free spell you want to, and then at the end of the turn, save 4 mana to play Fires as your final spell. So, that seems ridiculously good in that application to me, but this goes in multiple decks. Like I said, Temur Adventures might get some use out of this. It can return everything to everyone's hand during, board states that don't look great for it, but it can also do that during board states that kind of do look good for it. If you're stalemated with your opponent, you don't have a way to win the game outright right then and there, it might actually pay off to just return everything to your hand, because especially in the late game with Temur Adventures, you have 10, 12 mana available to you. I've gotten Beanstalk Giants to 16, and still haven't been able to close the game out on that turn. Well, Flood of Tears wouldn't necessarily help you close the game out, but what it would do is return all the stuff to your hand with all of the mana in the world still left to you, so you can get down Lucky Clover, play literally, Edgewall Innkeeper, and then start going off and replaying your adventure creatures and drawing more cards off of them thanks to Edgewall Innkeeper, getting more instances of adventure spells thanks to Lucky Clover again. So I can see a lot of advantageous situations for Temur Adventures if it were to play this card. But finally, there's also the blue-white Thassa deck. That deck just wants to win by getting a Thassa down and then getting an Agent of Treachery in place, but in the meantime, it plays a bunch of creatures that have really good ETB triggers like Elite Guard Mage and Charming Prince and whatnot. So I could see this being a panic button for that deck too, where it just returns everything to everybody's hand, and then it gets to replay these creatures with ETB triggers, and that's fine even if you already do have an agent out, because yeah, you don't get to do the Thassa flicker trick, but you still get to replay the agent and get its ETB trigger again. So again, as a panic button for decks that, especially for decks that don't have access to other panic buttons, especially mono blue agent and decks like that, I think this could be at least worthy of a try. Now, number 6 is yet another thing that draws cards, but this one draws a bunch of cards, and it can also just win the game. It can also just win the game right then and there. That is Return of the Wildspeaker, a card that doesn't actually cost that much mana when you think about it, and it's really splashable. It only costs you 1 green mana. That is it. The rest you can pay for it however you like. And that seems really, really good in a number of 3-color decks. I'll bring up Temur Adventures again when it comes to this card, because first of all, Temur Adventures doesn't even have to play this in its main deck. It can just play it in the sideboard, use Fae of Wishes to go search it up, and then play it on a board where you say control a Beanstalk Giant. I'll bring up Beanstalk Giant again, because there's plenty of boards that Temur Adventures has demonstrated where it can just draw like 12 cards of Return of the Wildspeaker, because it's got beans out. So you can just draw a ridiculous amount of cards. But also with Temur Adventures, there are going to be times, like I mentioned earlier, where you're in the late game, you've got a 14/14 Beanstalk Giant and an army of little dudes, 2 Edgewall Innkeepers, a bunch of other adventure creatures and such. But you still can't necessarily break through your opponent's board stay. Well, just use the second mode on Return of the Wildspeaker, and suddenly all your dudes are huge. All your Nissalands are 6/6s. I mean, just come on, man. Return of the Wildspeaker looks so crazy, even if you're not drawing Beanstalk Giant levels of cards off of it. All of the things that I said at the beginning of the video trigger Furious Rise are also incredible things to have on the board if you've got a Return of the Wildspeaker in your deck. Things like Rotting Regisar, Shifting Ceratops, Lovestruck Beast, Questing Beast, Hydroid Krasis even, because that can get to, huge levels. So there are just so many ways to effectively draw, 4, 5, 6 cards off of something like this. And I could see that being better than a card like Escape to the Wilds that a lot of these decks are currently playing. Escape to the Wilds gets around Narset, this doesn't, but at least this has a second mode that's still relevant if your opponent controls a Narset, and that's actually worth a lot in a lot of situations. But we're at the halfway point here in the list, and number 5 is maybe one of the most famous cards on the list. It's hard to call this obscure, but I'm still going to put Oketra on the list, because this is easily the least paid attention to of any of these God Eternals. You know, people still talk about Kefnet to this day and try to put it into stuff. There's a fan base for Ronus. Timmy's love Ronus. People still advocate for Bontu in Aristocrats decks and whatnot. You know, all of the gods have seen to, people love the Big Pig. Ilharg is a fan favorite as well, but Oketra just does not get that much press, and I think that's a problem, because Oketra is maybe one of the best gods and we just don't know it. First of all, I love that this card is anti-control, because there are still a few decks in the format that play counter spells, especially the blue-white Menace that's playing 4 full copies of Absorb. This card could be pretty good against. Doesn't matter if they counter your creature, you still get a 4/4, which is definitely worth something. But I'll bring up Adventures. Again, you know, we don't see white in too many Adventures decks anymore, but if you did play green-white Adventures, I could see doing this, especially considering there are going to be a lot of turns in just about any Adventures deck where, you know, you've racked up adventure spells for a few turns in the early game, and very often you pay that off by playing 2, 3, 4 adventure creatures all in the same turn, drawing a bunch of cards off of Edgewall Innkeeper. Well, you could also just double your board presence at the same time on those turns where you play, you know, again, 2 or 3 adventure creatures. You get 8 or 12 power extra off of Oketra, and I think that's worth a lot. But I guess one more thing I'll say about this card is that I think it could go pretty well in Great Henge decks as well. Now, Oketra doesn't really decrease the cost of Great Henge by that much, but it is worth noting that they're on curve with one another. You play Oketra on 5, you can play Great Henge on 6 if you've got the mana for it. So that's worth noting, but Great Henge decks, just like Adventure decks, are decks that tend to play a lot of creatures on the same turn, because they're already locked into playing a bunch of creatures just due to the Great Henge's text box, and they're likely to play a creature, draw a creature off of Great Henge, then play that creature, draw another creature off of Great Henge, and on those turns where you're doing that, again, just like the Adventures decks, you're getting 8, 12 extra power off of Oketra on those turns, so just really closing the door on the game. So I'm surprised, again, just like a lot of the cards in this list, this doesn't at least see 1 or 2 of play in more experimental decks. Number 4, and actually number 3, I'm going to cheat just a little bit and put multiple cards on the same number entry on the list. Now, this one is just conditional black tutors. We have 3 of them that come to mind: Scheming Cemetery, Wishclaw Talisman, and even Mausoleum Secrets, which is probably the most forgotten of all of these. But I think they all deserve a chance for different reasons. Scheming Symmetry is pretty decent in a format where you can play this in the same deck as Teferi and play it at instant speed. At the end of your opponent's turn, you can play this, and that means that you get to play your spell first, which is kind of why this card sucks, is very often your opponent's going to get to play their spell first. But we've got plenty of ways of drawing that card on our turn, but also getting rid of the card on top of our opponent's library. Jace is a perfect example of this. If you can Scheming Symmetry, and then activate Jace, well, not only do you draw the card on top of your library, they lose the card that they searched for, and that seems like a pretty good combo. But you could also just Ashiok the card on top of their library away. There are just plenty of ways to mill away the card they searched for, so Scheming Symmetry is actually not terrible looking in this format right now. There's so many ways to take advantage of it. And Wishclaw Talisman, let me bring up Karn again. Karn makes it so that you can just effectively get a free tutor off of this and your opponent can't activate it when they get it, so that's worth looking at. Even if Wishclaw Talisman is just something you put in your sideboard to search up with Karn and then take advantage of Karn's passive ability, that's probably worth a look, if nothing else, so keep that in mind. But when it comes to Mausoleum Secrets, we've got so many cards that mill ourselves. I'll bring these up for entry number 3 again, but cards like Tameo, Cavalier of Thorns, and cards, your decks based around these cards, very often get to the very, very tail end of their library. We're talking about they'll get into the teens of cards left in their library. You know, routinely in ramp decks, finish games with like 13 cards left in my library. So a lot of those cards end up in the graveyard. And Mausoleum Secrets actually ends up looking like a pretty decent card. It can only go search up black creatures, but I can see plenty of situations that it's still very advantageous in the very late game. So, again, I'm more surprised than anything that Mausoleum Secrets doesn't see at least some play in these Sultai decks that just churn through their library at lightning speed, because this is effectively a 2-mana thing that goes and searches up some of the most powerful cards in your deck. Another thing with Mausoleum Secrets, actually, before I shut the door on this entry, is Kroxa. Kroxa only costs 2 mana. That's it. So if it's somewhere in your deck, you can pay 2 mana, and with just 2 creatures in your graveyard, go search up a Kroxa, play it, and then maybe escape it out of your graveyard the same turn, depending on how late in the game it is, but at least set up escaping out of your graveyard on the next turn. I really think Mausoleum Secrets is passing under the radar if no reason other than Kroxa, but there's plenty of other stuff you can do with this card. Now, I told you I was going to cheat a little bit with numbers 4 and 3, so we're getting into the top 3 now, but this is yet another entry that's effectively 2 cards in the same spot. And that's because I couldn't decide between them, and they're similar in some ways. These are both black cards that care about how many cards you have in your graveyard. So I really, again, couldn't decide between them, and I wanted to spotlight both of them. So we're going to talk about Finale of Eternity as well as Lotless Giant here. Now, you could argue Lotless Giant has seen its day in the sun, it has seen some play and some attention and all that, but I think the community has by and large moved on from this card, and it's the exact wrong time to move on from this card. Just like the last entry, we've got cards like Tamiyo, Cavalier of Thorns to get through our deck at just blinding fast speed and just dump all of our cards into our graveyard. It has never been a better time for that. So again, more Soul-Tide decks should take advantage of Lotless Giant, but you've also got mono black decks, and I brought this trick up a little earlier in the video too. You've got mono black decks that play Nightmare Shepherd and Witch's Oven and whatnot. So just like how you can sacrifice Gary to Witch's Oven and then exile it from your graveyard, get a 1/1 token with Nightmare Shepherd and repeat Gary's Enter the Battlefield trigger, you can do the exact same thing with Lotless Giant. Play it, get a bunch of damage off of it, sack it to Witch's Oven, create a 1/1 token, get that ETB trigger again. And it might be nice to have a 1-of Lotless Giant in your mono black deck so that you can have that Gary trick on multiple sticks. It seems pretty nice. But when it comes to both of these, they do require not only that you have a bunch of cards in your graveyard, creatures specifically, but they also require that you have a lot of mana. Lotless Giant costs all the mana in the world, and Finale costs even more than that if you want to get all the creatures out of your graveyard. So we need big mana, but again, it's never been a better time for that with cards like Nyx Bloom Ancient and Nyx Lotus in the format. That very same mono black deck that plays Nightmare Shepherd could also make a pretty decent use of cards like Nyx Lotus to get a bunch of mana and cast Finale for 1 million, or cast Lotless Giant pretty easily in the late game. Those decks could use, you know, not those mono black decks, but other decks could use cards like Nyx Bloom to make all the mana in the world and then cast Finale of Eternity. If you're milling yourself in those decks with cards like, again, Cavalier of Thorns, for instance, then it actually seems like Finale of Eternity might be a really good way to use all of your mana. We're seeing a premium put on X spells in a format where we can make a lot of mana. Things like Finale of Devastation look very good right now, but I could definitely see the deck being built in such a way that it cares about putting cards into its graveyard, creatures specifically again, so that in the very late game, Finale of Eternity is just a game-breaking card, and arguably better than cards like Devastation on certain board states. But for number 2, we're going to talk about yet another card advantage piece. A lot of those going unnoticed, it seems, which is crazy. Because especially in standard Magic, card advantage is always at a premium no matter what it costs, so we're always on the lookout, especially in certain colors, for cards that create decent card advantage. And Gruesome Menagerie definitely does that, and again, in so many decks that are looking for it. You know, Mono Black could easily play 1 or even 2 copies of this card, and yeah, you know, I know, we're playing cards like Gary as a 4-of, so we can't afford all the 5-drops in the world. But at the same time, Gruesome Menagerie can bring back, you know, a 1 and a 2 and a 3, and that's pretty much the game. Just imagine not only how much card advantage and board presence that, you know, presents all at one time for just 5 mana, but also how much devotion count that adds to the board. So if you've got 5 mana and a Gruesome Menagerie and a Gary in your hand, there are going to be plenty of board states where your opponents just wiped you or whatever. And you play this with your 5 mana, and then next turn, play your Gary. Once you've been able to reestablish your board state due to Gruesome Menagerie. You know, just getting back a Gutter Bones and, say, a Priest of Forgotten Gods or some other 2-drop. You know, and also getting back like a Mayhem Devil or something in the Red-Black Aristocrats decks. Think about everything this does in Red-Black Aristocrats, by the way. A deck that's constantly sacrificing its own creatures. Just seems fantastic to me. Again, a 1 or 2 of is more than feasible in plenty of decks, be they, you know, mono black or red black or other decks in this format that play black and also play creatures. You know, green black can get back a Pelt Collector and a 2-drop and a Rotting Regisaur, and that seems very, very good to me. So Gruesome Menagerie definitely deserves a chance in more than one popular deck in this format. But here we are, everybody. Number 1, drum roll, what could it possibly be? Well, if you're a longtime viewer of the channel, you might have me scouted, but number 1, it's Chamber Sentry! Chamber Sentry, everybody! Number 1, Super Mario Bros. 2. Game of the Year, Chamber Sentry. This is still a criminally unnoticed card. And again, I know, bias. There was a point where my channel was known as like the Chamber Sentry channel for like 2 months. Like, I advocated so hard for this card and never did anything. And I still don't know why. This card is probably going to go into rotation in almost total and complete obscurity, never having actually done anything. And I will tip my hat to it as it rides into the sun, and shed a single tear all the while, because this card does not deserve to never ever see play. Especially now that we not only have Chromatic Lantern, we already had this card. There was already no excuse not to play Chamber Sentry, but we really don't have any excuse now because Dryad of the Elysian Grove is a thing. So we have, you can play 8 3-drops that enable Chamber Sentry to its maximum potential. And honestly, in the late game, I've already made the point, we're going into the late game in this format more often than not. If you're not playing with or against mono red, you're probably going to go into at least the mid-late game. And that's a point in the game where a card like Chamber Sentry really shines, because you're just doing 5 damage on every turn or alternate turns. But, you add in like a Rhythm of the Wild or some other thing that gives all your creatures haste, Perforos, for instance. Then suddenly you can loop this with enough mana. And again, like I've already made the point, this card is like the culmination of all the points I've already made in this video. We're in a format where you can make all the mana in the world with Nyx Bloom Ancients and whatnot. So, or Nyx Lotus, but for the purposes of Chamber Sentry, you really want Nyx Bloom Ancient. But in any case, we can make all the mana in the world. We can loop this because we have things that give it haste, or we can just play the long game with it and get it back every single turn. A 5/5 every turn that doesn't die is very good. That's really good. That's really good. It's immune to things like Elspeth Conquers Death, an important card in this format right now. So keep that in mind. It's a more than fine magic card that's really, really difficult to deal with. And if it ever is targeted by removal, just sink your mana into it and lava axe your opponent in the face. There's also the fact you can put extra counters on this. Plenty of ways to proliferate or otherwise make this an 8/8 or a 9/9, and at the end of the game, you just shoot your opponent for the rest of their life total. It is a fine magic card, and I will go to the grave exclaiming that this is a fine magic card that should see at least some amount of play, and if not real standard play like top tier play, I don't necessarily expect that. At least some level of experimentation that I don't think it's really gotten. And again, I'm just as much to blame as anybody else for that. So I'm going to try to fix that at some point soon. And there you have it. There are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 cards or so that I think are not getting their proper due, even in a world where everyone is trying to find like the sludgiest garbage at they're trying to dig as far as they can into the core of the earth for the cards that no one's ever heard of. I think that those are the most obscure things I could talk about in the format right now. Just let me know in the comment section if there's anything more obscure than these cards that I didn't touch on that you think deserves, again, a little bit of a highlight. Because there are a lot of cards that I didn't talk about in this video because I think they're too famous. I honestly think there's probably a whole other list of cards that are just barely not able to be on this list because they have received a little bit too much experimentation at this point in the format. I tried to go with only the most obscure stuff, but let me know if there's stuff even deeper we can dig for in this format that you think we can base decks around and actually pick up a game or two. I think there's a lot of interesting thought in this, in this realm right now, even in just standard Magic. So let me know your picks down there in the comments section, and then like the video and do all the other stuff. If you want to pick up any of these cards and build decks around them, make sure you help me out by doing that through the TCG player link in the description. I will put all of these cards on the list in their own link for you. So all you have to do, you don't have to search the cards individually. Just hit the link in the description. It'll take you to all of them. You can pick up whichever ones you want while also helping out your boy. So yeah, do that. And also do all the other things that support the channel. I've already told you, like, subscribe, do the things, Follow me on Twitter at SBMTGDev. We're currently campaigning for president in 2024 on a Magic-based platform. I have already pledged to, what are our campaign promises so far? Boy, that's not a good sign, right? Our campaign promises so far are to abolish the reserve list. We're going to do that. We're also going to reprint fetch lands, functionally reprint fetch lands under a different name at the uncommon level, ladies and gentlemen. So join the fight, #Dev2024. But also Medicare for all. We're going to do that too. But anyway, that's the real plank of our platform, but we're not going to discuss that until after we're in office. We have to present that we're a very establishment, serious candidate, and then once we get into office, we'll pass Medicare for all and all the stuff. So Yeah, that's our game plan at least. But we'll also pass a bunch of MTG related amendments and resolutions and executive orders and whatnot. So get in there, join the fight. SPMTG Dev on Twitter. Aside from that, support me on Patreon, which is actually the best way to support me because I don't really get paid aside from Patreon. So if you want me to keep being able to do this and presenting content in this way, just throw $1 into the Patreon pot every month. All I ask is a small order of fries. I won't spend it on a small order of fries. Occasionally I will. I don't really eat that much fast food. I know it looks like I do, but I almost never eat fast food. I just eat food around the house a lot. Like most of the day. I'm a fat guy. I just don't eat that much fast food. So I won't spend it on an order of fries. but in any case, just $1 a month. That's all I ask, and it'll help keep the lights on around here. But in any case, I think I'm actually finally done babbling for this one. If you couldn't tell, I had a bunch of coffee before I hit the camera, before I turned the lights on. So I probably talked really fast for the vast majority of this video, and I apologize for that. But in any case, just let me know how you feel down there in the comments section. Anything I missed, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the place. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Spread love and be kind. That's the platform right there. That's the slogan for the candidacy, and I mean every word of it. Spread love, be kind to each other.